You know, it was not that long ago that when we thought about stability shoes, we knew a couple of things. They would never work for anyone that did not need them. They were never all that fun. They oftentimes had some sort of hard plastic thing that would force your foot to land in a certain way. They had this unique ability to turn the joy of running into some sort of twisted act of torture that punished you with every step. But that has all changed. And there are stability shoes out there where probably the biggest kudos I could give is that if you did not know any better, you would not even notice that it was anything more than a solid daily trainer. So spoiler alert, the Mount Ghost P1, in my opinion, is a good example of a stability shoe done right. So hi everybody and welcome to another video. My name is Matt and this is What Matters to Matt, and that is correct. On today's video we're going to be talking all about the Mount Coast P1. Now to get the disclosure out of the way right off the bat, this was a shoe the Mount Coast sent me for the purpose of review, but however they're not telling me what to say in this video. Obviously my thoughts and opinions are definitely my own. And if after watching this video you want to check out more on the Mount Coast P1, I will put a link to that in the description down below. Okay, so before we get into the stats and before we go down through the upper, the midsole, and the outsole, and ultimately I'll let you know whether I think the Mount Coast P1 might be worth your hard-earned cash. Ultimately, that is a decision that you are going to have to make. I wanted to go over just something that I mentioned in the intro of this video, and it was about the idea that a stability shoe can actually be a fun or at least a good shoe to run in. And spoiler alert, Mount Coast P1 definitely is one of those shoes. And if you were to hand me, a couple of years ago, if you were to hand me a stability shoe, telling me that I was going to put that on my foot, I was going to go for a run, and I was going to come back and I was going to be happy, I would have told you that you were absolutely nuts. But that's no longer the case, and that isn't just specific to Mount Coast shoes, or at least the Mount Coast P1. Got the Mount Coast R1 up there on the shelf, got the Mount Coast S1 down there. The R1, it's hard to point backwards when we're looking through the camera. The R1 is sort of their ultra marathon, road ultra marathon shoe, and the S1 is the training partner to that, and the P1, this guy right here, is the stability training partner to the R1. So if you were to tell me that I was going to like a stability shoe, I would have told you that you were crazy. But shoe companies have gotten really good at thinking about ways that they can make stability shoes actually runnable for all sorts of people. Gone are the times when they would add sort of not gone are the times, but a lot of companies have gotten away from adding some sort of a big plastic block in the shoe that forces you to run in a certain way that just feels awful. Shoe companies have started to think about ways that they can be comfortable, that you can even pick up the pace in them, that they can guide your foot forward and not force your foot forward. Those are two very distinct differences. And if you're somebody who hasn't tried a stability shoe for a long time, or if you've been told that stability shoes can never be a good running shoe, or they're always going to be uncomfortable because of all those posting that they used to do, try them again. You'd be pleasantly surprised, because a lot of them now do sort of more guide your foot, and this is a good example of that. But we are going to go down through the upper, the midsole, and the outsole. I'm going to let you know exactly what I think. But first off, we have to start with talking about a few of those specs. Mount Coast says it is best for neutral / overpronation everyday runners and walkers. The upper is made up of a circular knit. The stack height in this shoe is 37 millimeters in the heel and 27 millimeters in the forefoot for a 10 millimeter drop. And the weight of this shoe is 9.9 ounces or 280 grams in a US men's size 9. So let's start off talking about that upper, and right off the bat I will say that the P1 fits me true to size in my US men's size 13. I have about a thumb's width here right at the end of the shoe. That circular knit material that they're using is comfortable but pretty thick. Honestly, the other night when I went on my final run before I was getting my thoughts together for this review, I was thinking it was humid, it was hot, and the shoe was running a little bit warm. Now, given this is not a speed shoe and I'm not running in incredibly hot climates, and I don't plan on taking this on really long runs, we'll talk about it more when I talk about where it fits into my shoe rotation. That's not really a concern for me. But if you are someone who lives in an extremely warm climate, that might be something you want to consider before actually purchasing the P1. Back here in the heel, there is a lot of structure. It is very stiff. You're not able to bend this at all. Even when I try to squeeze the shoe in, you're not really able to squeeze that much at all. And that does provide a lot of support. This is meant to be a stability neutral shoe. But what that also means is that you get that support and that your heel fits fits nicely down into the cup and that it holds the foot really, really well. Lockdown was not an issue at all. Padding around the heel is also pretty good, not overly done. Again, just about what I'd like to see in this sort of shoe, something I'm going to use for a daily trainer. It's a good amount, but it's not enough that it's going to become any sort of a sweat sponge. The tongue is fully gusseted and there is padding on the tongue enough that you don't get any lace bite whatsoever. And the lacing system. Now the lacing system, this is the only reference to a race day shoe that I'm going to have with the P1, and you will see that it is kind of off center a little bit, and it does remind me of how the Vaporfly, the old Nike Vaporfly shoes, actually ran a little bit off center. I'm sure that has something to do with trying to lock in your foot a little bit better and something to do with stability elements, but it really doesn't do anything for me. All I can say is that it works really, really well, but I don't notice any difference. It might throw some people off if you're used to seeing that lacing go right down the center of your shoe when you look down, but I don't think you're going to notice that out on the run and not when you actually tie up the shoe. Other than that, mostly the lacing system is pretty traditional. You're able to do a runner's loop up here. You will see this one little added feature that is kind of a neat feature. I haven't really used it that much, but if you are somebody who likes to really dial in that midfoot, you got this little extra tab with a couple extra holes where you can just move the way the pressure point is in the middle of that midfoot and that lacing system, move it down just a little bit to get an extra little micro adjustments. But for me, again, not something that I bothered with when I actually laced up the shoe. I was able to lock down really, really well. I did go with runner's knot right off the bat, but that's more out of just traditionally what I do with all my shoes. Also, one thing I forgot to mention back here around this heel collar is that this is really rigid. I mentioned that this was stiff back here, but it's also stiff up along the sides. And if you're somebody who has some sensitivity around the top of your ankles, again, just something to keep in mind that this could create a pressure point. Nothing of any concern for me. It's very comfortable and there's a good amount of padding, but it is quite rigid. There is also a heel tab here. Now it is stretchy and elastic, but it's so small that really not something that I'm going to find very useful in getting the shoe on. I didn't have any trouble getting the shoe on, so another point where it really doesn't have any concern for me. But just if you're somebody who really likes to use those heel tabs, this isn't something that's going to be much of value, but I do like the aesthetics for it on the back of the shoe. As far as overlays, you will see one that runs sort of along the lateral and the medial side of the shoe, again providing a little bit of extra structure. And last thing I'll mention about this upper before we get into my overall feel of it is just this toe cap up front that you usually find more at home on a trail shoe, but you do see it here on this shoe. And that is not new to Mount to Coast. You saw that on the S1 as well. So overall pros and cons with this upper. It is really, really comfortable. It did fit me true to size and I was able to get a really good lockdown in this shoe, and I felt that it held on this platform really, really well. A couple of the drawbacks is that I think they could have made it a little bit more breathable. Next iteration of this, we might want to thin out some of that upper a little bit to make it just a little bit more airy and breathable when you're out there in the heat. Also, the overlays between the toe cap, the overlay that we have here around the shoe, I get that this is a stability shoe, but I think all of that and even the extra structure that they have around the lacing system, it would be kind of nice if we were able to just thin all that out or take some of that totally away. That toe cap I don't think needs to exist on this shoe, just to lighten up the shoe a little bit. It is not an overly heavy shoe, and I get that it's meant to be a stability shoe, but I think there's a lot that they could do with this upper to lighten the load just a little bit in the P2. Now we get to talk about the midsole, where all the magic happens, and this is a good example of where a company gets that stability right when it comes to their midsole. The light cell compound that they're using in this midsole, 37 millimeters in the heel and 27 millimeters in the forefoot, is the same compound that we find in the R1 and the S1, and if you run in either one of these shoes, this feels very, very similar when it comes to just the amount of bounce and the amount of rebound that you have in the P1. It's not overly squishy and it's not overly bouncy like we see in some of the other daily trainers out there on the market, but it also doesn't feel like a brick like we'd get out of a standard EVA from the past. And you sort of just get a consistent ride that's going to offer enough energy return, exactly what I would like in my daily trainers. Consistent and expecting what you're going to get out of that foam. Now there are a couple of stability elements that Mount to Coast has built right into the midsole of the shoe. The first one you're not able to see at all, and frankly you're not even able to feel it when you're out on the run or even when you're pinching in on this midsole foam. And that's something they call their 3D arch rail system, and right on their website Mount to Coast does mention that pronation is an essential normal part of your gait cycle, so they're not trying to force your foot in a certain way, but rather just support it and help guide it. And what they mean by pronation is essential when it comes to your gait is when you land out here on the outside of your foot and you roll forward and you go to the big toe off that you've got that normal pronation happening, and they're not trying to force that doesn't happen at all. They're just trying to support it with that 3D arch rail system to really get you powerful and moving forward through that gait cycle. And really the only spot in the shoe where we actually do see that 3D arch system, the visible tech, is right up here on the medial side of the shoe. And it sort of actually kind of reminds me of where we see nylon plates used in some other shoes. Now, a lot of shoes these days are not necessarily using nylon plates and even some of the carbon plates for that extra bit of propulsion. And sometimes they're actually used to just add some stability. So it's not that far off, but I think it's done with a little bit more intent here and not really meant to be propulsion at all, just extra supportive when you're out there running. So what are my final thoughts on this midsole? Look, it's not overly exciting. It's not overly bouncy. It's not overly squishy. It's not the shoe or the midsole that I'm going to be thinking about or reaching for when I'm looking for some extra motivation to get out there on a really exciting run to really get me pumped up to run in. But it is very, very consistent, and it's exactly the kind of thing that I'm looking for to just log those daily miles. And the supportive elements that they've added to this midsole clearly doesn't add to the excitement of the shoe. And frankly, I do notice it when I'm actually out walking around in the shoe. I can feel those stability elements. So it's not really a shoe that I would like to be walking in. It's more of a shoe that I want to be running in. I know they mentioned it can be a walking shoe. There are other shoes that I find more comfortable for that. But when I'm actually running, I don't notice those at all. It just feels like a very consistent daily trainer that offers a good amount of support. So overall, fan of the midsole. It does what it needs to do. So lastly, we get to talk about the outsole of the shoe. And I don't know if you can tell in this video, but there's not a whole lot of shape to that outsole, and it does run fairly wide, again, adding to some of the stability of the shoe. But also, there is a good amount of rubber, and I've had this out in several conditions on concrete, pavement, wet rocks, crushed rock surface, and it grips fairly well. And also, I've got a little bit over 100 kilometers in the shoe, and I'm seeing next to no wear on that rubber at all. So I can't tell you about the overall durability over hundreds and hundreds of miles, but I can tell you right off the bat, I think this is going to last quite a long time, and I do think that it does grip pretty well in most conditions. And I guess the last thing to mention about this outsole is you'll see this gray strip here, and that's built into the outsole and into the midsole, and it's their GoFlow technology. Now, this is not exclusive to the P1. We find it in the S1 and the R1. Again, really, really hard to point. And it's really not meant to be a stability element, more about just supporting the foot in running forward. So final thoughts on the outsole, nothing really fancy, no real complaints, feels like it's going to last, and I guess like a common theme with this shoe, it just gets the job done. So look, before we get into where this actually fits into my shoe rotation, because it does have a spot there, I want to go over just my final thoughts and who I think this shoe might actually be for. Really, it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's not overly exciting. You're not going to get an extreme amount of bounce. You're not going to get an extreme amount of excitement out of this shoe. You're not going to take this for any fast workouts, but it does what it says on the tin. If you're somebody who needs a supportive shoe and a lot of stability, this might be a good daily trainer option for you. If you're a neutral runner that sometimes wants to have a little bit of extra stability in some of your runs, like I do in some of my runs, this might be a good option for you. Perhaps the best way to describe it is that it is a stability shoe that just doesn't feel clunky. Not overly exciting, but not clunky, and that's important because that means that this shoe is not going to ruin your run. I'm happy that they didn't try to go to max stack with this shoe, because if they did, with all the stability elements that they did add to this shoe, it would feel clunky and it would feel a little bit like a brick, but it's right in that neutral daily trainer, not too big, not too small. My biggest complaint probably does come from the upper, even though, again, it's comfortable, it's kind of overdone. I don't understand why they put such big toe caps on this shoe that belongs on trail shoes, mount to coast, not on daily trainers, and it's a little bit warm. So where does this actually fit into my shoe rotation? Well, the funny thing is that I've been thinking about this over the last couple of weeks, and I am a fan of max cushion daily trainers, max cushion shoes to actually get me through those recovery runs. I am a big fan of the Nimbus 27, and I'm a big fan of the Glycerin Max. But one of the things I've started to notice is that some of those days where I'm feeling incredibly beat up and incredibly tired, and I just want to get out there and log the miles and recover from all of the hard miles that I'm actually doing during marathon prep, those max cushion shoes, even though they're super protective and they have no ground feel whatsoever, they just all of the sudden, or after you get just a few miles in, start to feel like a lot on the foot. And that really just can be a hard thing to avoid, even though foams have gotten better, even though we do see some energy return out of something like the Glycerin Max. The fact is, I'm running around in the US men's size 13, so already I'm dealing with quite a big shoe. And what something like the P1 actually provides for me is some extra support when my joints, when I'm feeling a little bit beat up, but I don't want something overly heavy on my foot. I don't want to feel like I'm waving a boat around on the end of my leg. And this does that for me. It's got lots of support. It protects my joints, and I'm able to recover when I take this out on those easy recovery runs after I've just done a big workout the day before. So that's it, guys. That's my final thoughts on the Mount Coast P1, a shoe that is not overly exciting, but gets the job done when I need the job done. If you like this video and you're not currently subscribed, please consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and comment in the comment section down below. Is there a stability shoe, if you don't even need one, that you are putting into your shoe rotation? And if not, what is your shoe rotation? What are you actually wearing for those daily runs? My name is Matt, and this has been What Matters to Matt, and ultimately, what matters to me most is my family. I'll see you guys in the next video.